Well, it is 2 o'clock, at least according to my computer, which I guess is what we're going off of. So, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our first ever virtual interview. My name is Peter Blair. I am the Policy and Advocacy Director with Just Zero. For those of you that are unfamiliar with us, Just Zero is a national environmental nonprofit organization. We work with community members, policymakers, organizers, and everyone in between to implement just and equitable solutions to climate damaging and toxic consumption waste disposal practices. Today, I am thrilled to be joined by Keenan and Adam, who are the co-founders of Revino. We'll be discussing Revino's work to change the status quo when it comes to polluting single-use beverage containers. Just a quick reminder for everyone that this event is being recorded. That's just so we could share it far and wide with the people who are unfortunately not able to join us this afternoon. We will also be sharing some links with you throughout the chat that relate to the topics we'll be discussing. Now, before I dive into the questions, I'm just going to kick it over to Keenan and Adam to introduce themselves.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, my name is Keenan O'Hearn. I am one of the co-founders of Revino. My history and journey leading up to founding Revino was riddled with a lot of just corporate work, working in the consulting side of things, but also then moving to winemaking and kind of thinking through the processes of the actual winemaking process and what actual externalities came from that. But I've done my stint after MBA and trying to really kind of think through strategy, think through supply chains, and all of that culminated into what we're going to be talking about today in Revino. But I'm going to let Adam, my co-founder, share his story as well.
Hi, everybody. Adam Rack, born and raised in Western Kansas. I got into this sort of sustainability movement from agriculture, watching perennial crops projects from the Land Institute close to my home. And as I moved out to the Pacific Northwest, I did what young people do 10 years ago, moving out there and joined the wine industry. So I'd been in the wine space for the last 8 years. I was running a no single-use packaging winery called Cooper's Hall. We were in the keg space, and in 2018, we started using refillable beer bottles and really started seeing the viability of that program of reuse. But the format, a beer bottle just didn't work for us. So met Keenan a few years ago, and we really went to accelerate this pretty quickly. And it's come to be the Revino we're at today.
Thank you both for joining us. We really are excited to have you with us and excited to learn more about the work you're doing. So with that, let's jump into the first question, which really is, what is the driving force behind Revino and your mission to revive refillables?
Absolutely. It's such a good question, honestly. I would say, and hopefully not stereotypically, but it's really the people that are driving this forward. If you look to Adam and myself and our other team members, we all have a shared ethos. We're coming together as parents, winemakers, stewards of both the land and just our, communities itself. And the founding of this all really started out of just a localized effort, looking at what was happening to the end of life for not only, wine bottles, but just any recycling that were happening in our communities, and noticing that there was really just a single life cycle of these bottles or these containers and things, and the end of life was really just the landfill. That was really the only solution. And so for me, I had grown up between here and the Netherlands, and over there, reuse and the standardization of just like returning things is so habitual. It's commonplace, right? It's a part of just nature on a daily basis that so many people partake in. And so thinking about that in contrast to then living in Oregon and having a community here and being a homeowner and knowing what was happening to my waste, and kind of the stark reality that, oh, wow, we don't actually do these things that so many other countries do, right? That was really what kind of started building this, I would say, energy towards, I know that there's a solution. That solution is tried and true, and it's been in practice for decades. How do we implement that solution here? How do we start to teach and educate, our communities and the people that are participating in both purchasing, but also producing, to respond to a returnable, reusable system? So that was really kind of the driving force, was this can work, and it does work. How do we make it work here? And so much has come from that, obviously. We've seen so much progress in terms of just others that are thinking in that same limelight, right? Looking at this through a lens of how do we encourage reuse, but also make it part of just the new status quo, right? How do we make it so that we can look at the bygone era and understand what we did and see it as, this really system that works very well, but bring it back to something that meets today's needs, but also helps us achieve a future that we all want, right?
That is wonderful. And I'm glad you mentioned energy, because it definitely takes a lot of energy to do this work, to really,
Tremendous.
to make this happen in the US. And it's interesting that you bring up Europe, because Europe is definitely so far ahead of us when it comes to these reuse systems. And that doesn't need to be the case. We definitely can make these things work here. So I guess that segues really nicely into another question that I want to ask, which, what has been the reaction to Revino's refillable system? Are people excited to have these available to them? How are the wineries reacting that you're working with? It is not the status quo here, so I'm very curious what the reaction has been.
Yeah, and I'll continue in that question as well, just because at the moment where I'm sitting, I'm at one of our producing partners, and this producing partner is Willamette Valley Vineyards, and just a few yards away from me is our bottles going onto bottling lines. But in this particular instance, we were here just last week, and we were talking to both the tasting room staff and others that were in the tasting room, and they had just sent out a newsletter about reuse and our Revino bottles being poured on site. And they had seen more response that they'd ever seen from a newsletter, and more interaction from people asking, can I get wine poured from a reusable bottle? And what do I need to do to bring that bottle back? And just that response alone, right, is so encouraging to see how a member of a winery through a club, right, can be so enthused about something to actually ask about how they can participate with the producer themselves, right? And now the producer, Willamette Valley Vineyards, is going, wow, this interaction is incredible. Now we're seeing people actually, a part of our process, right? Now they're a part of our supply chain and the actual material that we're spreading around, right? And it's coming back to us, and now we get to utilize this again. And, it's adding this new kind of level to the interaction that they've had. But I'll say one other little anecdote, because it was so great just getting to walk into another tasting room in Newberg, Oregon last week. And it's another partner called Etfi. And I walk in, and they were talking about how they've actually seen new club membership go up because of the fact that now they're using reusable bottles. So people, I think, are really hungry for this, right? They've been looking, and I think it's a known fact that this is a system that works and people understand it, right? It's kind of that no-brainer solution, right? Oh, I use a bottle, I wash it. I use my wine glass every day and I wash it and I reuse it. Why can't I do that with my bottle? And so now when they see that, they're going in and they're actually participating, and actually driving more business for those businesses that are taking action and being leaders in this space. So that reaction alone has just been incredible for us. And it's also really encouraging to see consumers stepping up to the plate when we really weren't sure how much education was going to take for them to really kind of get to that tipping point to start participating in these systems. And so far it's been lower than we anticipated. Yeah.
That's incredible. And it's really exciting to see that there's excitement on both sides, right? That the wineries are interested in doing this, that they're seeing more engagement because they're offering this, and that consumers are really ready for it. But I guess maybe I put the cart before the horse, and unfortunately, a lot of these programs aren't available to people in the US, right? So I'm just curious, how does this work? What does Revino's refillable beverage system look like? What is actually going on here? How are you guys doing this?
Yeah, I'll take that one, Peter. I mean, how it works, we're not revolutionary in many ways. This is a system that's been done. It happens every day in many other countries. So we have a good groundwork to lay for this here. This has existed in the US not that long ago, all the way up till the 90s. Beer bottles were reusing. There was a wine reuse company, an entire beverage sector company was dedicated to selling wine bottles back in the 80s and reviving them down in California. And we just kind of lost track of that as our supply chain adjusted, as things moved. And so we took a step back when we came together to start this, and we looked at the whole supply chain. So where did it fail in the past? Where have efforts to revive it or bring it back failed or had pain in the past? And what's working in other countries? We have plenty to go on there knowledge-wise. So So we stepped back with our winery partners. We brought on some distributors in conversations. We have manufacturers at the table. OI Glass is one of our partners and is here with us, like building the system out. So what we looked at and what we learned is the best systems have more standardized packaging. If you go to the grocery store and just look at the shelf, look at Pinot Noir bottles, for instance, that one shape, that burgundy design, it has hundreds of variations potentially, whether it's a slightly different width, different heights, different shoulders, the little curvy parts. And that has been designed in over the years. It's just become more and more, well, I want my own custom bottle. I want a bottle that has a little different look. But if we also take another step back, most of them look very similar. They're all kind of standardized. So there's not a lot of variation at this point. And in the last few years, things have really started to shift. We've started to see these heavyweight bottles be moving out of the market. We're starting to see wine reviewers push back on actually even reviewing or considering highlighting bottles that are heavy, because they're saying the wine inside is what's important. We can put wine in all sorts of packaging. Glass bottles still remain the most viable. So when we looked at how to make this work, we talked about a standard bottle, but with hundreds of variations, it's hard to start to collect or even process everything when 90% of it can't be reused because it's all different and you're sorting a lot throughout the system. So we went to the table with 75 wineries, mostly from the Willamette Valley, but we had some from Washington, Oregon, a few partners down in California gave some input. And we designed a bottle that they wanted to use that could be sorted through return systems, identified on the shelf by consumers. And when we look at the sending those bottles that have been reused back into the system, something that could be trusted. So when you put it on a bottling line, you can see as you put that bottle down that it's the same as the others going in. There's no slight variation that's going to cause breakage or stoppage on the line. So we have a few different return streams. That's a big one. So we designed a bottle. We're getting wineries to use it. They're very excited. It's elegant. It's refined. The feel is really good, which is important when you're talking about putting a $75 bottle of wine into a shared package, into something that some other brand is going to be using. It's got to be right, and it does feel right so far as we've been releasing, as we've seen wineries interested in actually bottling their product. They're excited. So we don't have to change many things as it goes into the system. The bottles work on the same bottling lines. We have the same capsules, the same closures, pop a cork in there. It's the same cork that you're using with a standard bottle. And then bottles go out two different ways. We have things that are poured directly in tasting rooms and sold to customers from the wineries themselves. And those are a really easy collection stream that we tap into. And that's those direct conversations, wineries that engage with their consumers on a daily basis, maybe at quarterly shipments. They're having people come in, pick up their bottles. And right now they're already using tote bags. They're encouraging their club members to bring back totes and refill them instead of using boxes every single time. So we're adding one more step to that. Instead of just bringing back your empty tote, just pop your bottle right back in when it's empty. And when you've got a 6-pack, bring it on back. And there's a lot of wine poured on site as well. So we get to take a few options. We get to pick up what those wineries, the waste that they're generating now becomes a value product. We actually get to pick up and incentivize wineries to collect and have us pick those up, and we take them out of the waste stream because they have value, because they can be reused again. And that's really changing the narrative on what trash is, what recycling is. Because this glass that previously had to go back, get crushed, or maybe just go to the landfill forever, can now be reused through our systems. And especially when you look at some wineries with huge event venues, they've got weddings on site, they're doing parties and hosting music weekly on their locations. So that's a large stream of returns. And then we have a few other partnerships along the way. If we look at restaurant returns, we have a few distributors we're working with, starting here in Oregon, who can pick up those bottles that are on glass pour lists that are served in their restaurants. They're there weekly, they're there bi-weekly. They can just pick up those empties as they go about their distribution systems, and those empty vans that are returned to the warehouse every night actually are being utilized. So we're leveraging existing systems. And We've also got the outside stream. Once those bottles escape these closed systems, that's a little harder to get back. But with beverages, we have a really good opportunity through deposit return networks, through programs like bag drop programs that operate in multiple states already, where those bags are really interesting. It's a really interesting program. Look it up if you haven't thought about it or seen it in your area. But you take all your deposit containers, put them in a bag, slap a sticker or a QR code on them, and you drop it off in a container. And those get sorted out, processed. So aluminum goes to the aluminum recycler, plastic goes to a plastic recycler, and glass gets crushed or pulled out if they're reusable containers. That's kind of another access point for us to get those bottles back. And we send them back through our wash process. Same wash equipment you can get from overseas. Very trusted. It's been about the same for the last 50 years. High quality, proven models, and we bring them back into the system right alongside the new glass every year as we sell it.
Sounds straightforward enough to me. I mean, it sounds like you guys have also done an incredible amount of work already to really, capture all the different ways that wine is consumed at your winery. So it's wonderful to hear that you've got models in place for on-site and for off-site even, which I know does get tricky. I mean, maybe not so much with wine, but one of the benefits or problems with beverage containers is they are predominantly consumed on the go. So getting those back is definitely tricky. And I can totally see how deposit return systems or bottle bills would be a great type of mechanism to really get them back. And it's so interesting. Both of you really mentioned the energy around this, the excitement, and Adam, the way you can actually do this, that you said you're not revolutionaries, but it certainly sounds like you are to me. But I mean, really, when I'm buying wine, I want to buy the wine. I don't care about the package so much. That's just a negative externality we all have to deal with. So it's incredible to see how when people are presented with this opportunity and when it's made simple for them, they really take it. But I guess that leads to the next logical question, which is this is not the predominant method of dealing with beverage containers in the US.
Yes.
I mean, we're predominantly dealing with single-use containers that have that, fill, consume, destroy method. So what do you guys see as the barriers that are really keeping refillables from being the predominant way that we handle beverages and consume them in this country?
Yeah, I think, Peter, you mentioned, this hasn't really been in the US for a while. And a lot of that has been economics. Once that equipment left the country, once it got shut down, once it became old for a lot of those existing systems. I know in Oregon, the last time bottles were washed from a brewery that was purchased in the state around the year 2000, that equipment had been operating for 40 years. It didn't make sense. They needed to replace it or just scrap the program altogether. And when the market drives you to cheapest and the highest competition, it's difficult. So the economics don't always pencil out for some materials. For a lightweight plastic bottle, for instance, it's going to be hard to get to that point where reuse is on par cost-wise. But if we don't start now in a space where it does make sense, where glass is more expensive, we are in that perfect market where wine bottles are the predominant option for wineries. If you want to age your product in a container, which is how a lot of wine in the market ages, you don't have to put an expiration date on your wine. And that's partly because of the glass packaging. We're really committed to that tradition in this space. In the wine industry, we're committed to being able to sell our wine. It's very flexible. We can put something in a bottle 5 years from now, that wine might be better. Whereas if you're storing that in a plastic container or a can, you've got 6 months, maybe a year. It really depends on the material. Those are all options on the market. And I think, we're not saying that's not a part of the system as we go forward, because they have their place. But for the most of the marketplace, wine is still really committed to glass. And I will say 5 years ago, I don't think we would have had a viable business. The market trends have really changed. People have started lightweighting their packaging and moving to what our bottles are, an eco-weight bottle. So we actually offer an average reduction in weight. So even if these do go to the markets that we can't get these returned in, if they go to Missouri, unfortunately, we won't be able to collect in every state every time. But I think the CEO of IKEA USA today at Circularity mentioned that if we try to make it perfect, it's not going to work. And that's been one of our approaches from the beginning. It's start with collecting what we can where we can and making incremental improvements every year. Where can we get bottles back next year? What's successful this year? What's successful next year? Learn from those, expand on those networks, and then we continue improving. And as we see the costs come down, they become very viable for other beverage containers, for other markets in the space. Spirits is a particularly expensive one. You see spirits bottles that are $8 to $10 to produce that bottle, and they're really fancy. They got metal on it, and that complicates the recycling side too. So there's a huge amount of back end work that we have to do to get to other markets, but we believe it's possible. We believe we'll get there in the United States.
Yeah,
deposit return systems are changing as well. There's a lot of conversation about adding wine into those systems because it's the cleanest stream of materials for recycling. And courage, really. What does it take except for knowing that we can do this? The pilots have all proven themselves across the country. We see this across the oceans. We see this just in Canada. 98% of beer bottles in Ontario through the beer store are reused, collected every year. Which is an incredible rate, and we can do this here. So it's asking our wineries to build this with us, asking the retail partners that we're engaging with to say, yeah, we can do this. And it takes all of us at the table building this together.
Yeah, and I'll add to that too, because Adam really touched on the barriers that we faced on the production side, right? Like actually getting these bottles to market and what it actually required in terms of the partnerships that we needed to set up for that to happen properly, right? But I would even argue that the larger barrier that we've always known was going to be the case was, how do we educate the consumer? How does the consumer know to choose this bottle on the shelf? And we've done some of that in kind of the beginning stages in terms of making the bottle identifiable so it's easier. But right, we get this question from investors, we get it from people that are just walking down the street wondering, how will I know? And I think there's something to be said for the collaboration that's already happening in the reuse space. There's so many companies that are sharing and shouting this message of reuse out there, and the material is all relatively the same, right? The system works as a circle, as the donut economics of it are all very much the same if you look at it in terms of layman's terms, right? But for us, we see that as something that's powerful, right? There's this multiplier effect that happens when you start collaborating with even others that are doing this in Europe, France, Italy, right? Canada, like Adam mentioned. Each one of those systems is doing the exact same thing for all intents and purposes. And we get to leverage that, right? We get to show how all of these efforts are working. And through testimonials or just through, data, we're able to prove that the system is relevant and that it can be accepted. And through that, we're able to build kind of this really easy, I would say, understanding for the consumer around this. But it does take a lot of education, and we're building those materials. But I like to call out the fact that there's organizations like Just Zero that are sharing this message, right? That are pushing this out there so that communities can understand how to participate, because people really want to participate. And we're here and we're saying, hey, yes, buy our bottles, sure, but there's so much more to it all, right?
And that policy front's changing as well. There's so many people engaged on this that are trying to change and make this viable. Even California, just a few years ago, you had to crush your glass bottles when you took them back. And with, I believe it was SB 54, huge coalition of advocates and NGOs and business owners coming to the table and saying, well, how about we just scrap that and say, we can reuse them too. Here we go. Let's open up a whole new market.
Yeah, it's really wonderful to see that the policy and the work you're doing to innovate the systems is really going hand in hand. California is a great example. I know Maine has recently done some revamps to their bottle bill, their return system, and made sure there is some money available to really fund reuse and refill, because, I love what you said about we can't wait for it to be the perfect moment, or, we have to act now. The need's too good. It really is. We know that the system that we have is just incredibly polluting, and there's no such thing as a way when it comes to disposing of these things. So it's wonderful to hear that while there have been, some challenges, you guys are rising to the occasion. And I guess that leads to the next, probably final question I want to ask, because we are coming up on time, is, what have been the biggest successes that you guys have seen in your time doing this? What has really helped push Revino to that next level?
Yeah. Adam, you want to start?
Yeah. Engagement. It's people coming to the table. One of the other people we've reached out to, I'm at Circularity this week, and I know so many people here already who are working on this, and we're meeting in person and having these conversations. And it's been incredible. We've had a network of contacts that, one person says you should reach out to this person. They've been helpful. The packaging industry has been incredibly helpful. Distributors, glass distributors, everyone throughout the supply chain that we've touched base with says, yeah, I think this is the time. Like, how do we work with you? How do we make this happen together? That engagement and collaboration has been the key to our success to this point. And that goes all the way up. OI Glass is our partner. They put out a press release recently highlighting this, which you think of partnerships in the space, and having your manufacturer at the table of the products that these wineries are used to using, having someone who knows this, does this high quality glass that comes out of these factories around the world. They're the largest, I believe, by volume glass packaging manufacturer globally. And they really have the power to start changing things, to start saying, okay, well, reuse is a part of our system, because at the end of that market, at the end of that lifespan of that reusable bottle, when it gets rejected or it gets cracked or chipped, we actually send that back to them. They want that material back. They're part of this bigger circular economy. And we actually get to help add value to that supply chain. We get to bring those back to a centralized facility, wash them, process them, and then send them back to OI if they are not worthy of reuse again. And that gives them the cleanest feedstock that they can imagine. So they have started to really engage on this, do their life cycle analysis, and add reuse into something they support.
Yeah, and to be perfectly honest, I think we've really swapped the C words in our space for not competition, but for collaboration. And collaboration has just become such a key component of what we do with the business. And it's true collaboration, right? It's a sharing of resources. It's a encouraging of those other companies, and maybe even providing a platform or a launch pad for them to succeed, right? And it's because I think we all do have that, going back to the beginning of the conversation, that shared ethos, right? Maybe the pulling of the mantle of stewardship, right? Wanting to be better every single day, and to make something actually happen together collectively. And I think, that's all probably to the definition of maybe a movement, right? And we're all kind of moving together, but in a lot of ways, it feels that way. It doesn't feel like we're doing this on our own, although sometimes it can be daunting and kind of cumbersome. But it feels like there's all these pieces that we get to kind of just connect with and utilize, and actually fall onto somebody else's expertise, and know and trust that those expertise are probably the best, and that we get to kind of bring and do something together that really becomes something greater and more beautiful.
I think that's I really like that quote: "A rising tide lifts all boats."
Absolutely.
That's very true in this system.
No, it definitely is, and I love that you talked about it as a movement, because it really is. I mean, there's so many different pieces, but essentially, the ethos you were talking about, it's so prevalent, and I think it's only going to become more prevalent as people continue to really think about the negative aspects of a lot of the ways that we consume things. And it's great to hear that that the people who are producing these glass bottles, that have those relationships from years of working with wineries, like, see this as the future and are invested in this. So I can't speak for anyone else, but I'm feeling very, very inspired. We have about a minute left, which unfortunately is not time to ask another question. But I just wanted to say thank you both so much for taking the time to speak with us today. We really appreciate it. It's so wonderful learning about the amazing work that you're doing. I really am feeling incredibly inspired right now. So I'd encourage everyone to stay tuned, for Revino. Next time you're shopping for wine, I know when I'm shopping for wine, I will be seeing if I can see any of those packaging that you were talking about. And also, if you want to learn more about Just Zero's work and the wonderful things that we're doing, there's going to be a link in the chat. Feel free to sign up for our emails, and stay tuned for our upcoming events. But thank you, everyone.
Awesome.
We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Peter.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Have a good one, everyone.